Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special edition of the Artist Forge on AI in the art industry. I'm really excited for this conversation today. We've got some amazing artists here to talk about the way that AI is already impacting the art world, and then make some guesses about what we might be looking at in the future. So, fair warning, I'm coming at you from COVID land. Brain fog is real. If I stumble, hopefully you'll forgive me for that. Might have to pause and cough my brains out every now and then. Hopefully you'll forgive me for that too. And I think you will once you see the incredible panel of folks here we have to talk about AI, what we think it's doing now, and where we think it's going to go. So with me today are some incredible artists, including Matt Stagliano, Dennis Dunbar, Bekka Bjorke, Renee Robin, and Kate Woodman. We are hoping a couple more of our panelists will be able to show up. Unfortunately, a few had to drop out due to some family issues and prior commitments that just got extended or they weren't expecting. So hopefully we will have a chance to bring them on at another time and have those conversations. But if you are in the audience today, I hope you will say hello to the incredible panel here. We've already got some friends joining us from Facebook land. Hello, friends. We're so excited to have you. Remember, you do have to give StreamYard permission to use your name if you would like your name to appear. If not, you can go ahead and just type your name in there before you type, and we'll know who you are. Bassam is also with us today. Hello, Bassam, and Crystal as well. So excited to have you guys with us. All right, so to get us started, what I would love to do is just have everybody give themselves a quick introduction. They're going to let you know who they are and what they do. And then we'll find out what their current stance on AI is. And the way that we're going to run this after that will be kind of a round table. So people will stay muted unless they have something they want to say or respond to. And then we will let them respond in the order that they have unmuted. If you are in the comments today, anytime there's a question, that question is to you as well. And also feel free to put any thoughts you have in the comments, and we will try to address those as we go. So if that's all clear, let me go ahead and we'll start with Matt, and then Dennis, Kate, Renee, and Bekka. So go ahead and introduce yourselves, y'all. Let everybody know what you do and where folks can find you.
Hey, Nicole, thanks for having me. Matt Stagliano. I have Stone Tree Creative here in Maine. I'm a portrait photographer and a commercial photographer, and I spent a lot of years in corporate IT and mergers and acquisitions in the high-tech bubble, and just started dabbling with AI then, and I'm really excited to talk about how it impacts art tonight.
I guess my turn now. I'm Dennis Dunbar. I'm a high-end retoucher. I say I add the Photoshop magic to images for movie posters and ad campaigns. Love working on pixels and pushing them around. I get the easy part because I don't have to come up with concepts and all that stuff. So I just try to make stuff you all shoot look good. So I love doing all that. I also love teaching Photoshop and giving tips and hints about that as well. The AI stuff's really intriguing. For me, it represents a rabbit hole I could disappear down for days at a time and not come up. So I have to be really cautious about my use for it. But it will be an interesting topic to talk about.
Hi guys, I am Kate Woodman. I am a commercial photographer. I will be perfectly honest here. I actually have not yet dabbled personally in AI. I just live vicariously through Bekka mostly, who's probably one of the more well-versed people on the panel on AI. But anyway, for me, as a commercial photographer, I can see some kind of inroads into AI and how it could be implemented, but it'll be really interesting to see over the next 5-10 years what that does to the commercial world. I have some thoughts on it. We'll get into that later, but yeah.
Hey, I'm Renee Robin, and I'm a composite artist and photographer as well, working largely in the commercial space. And I have a lot of opinions on AI art, both good and bad. So I'm really curious to see where this is all going to go as well. And I suppose I'll take the gloves off once we actually start talking about it.
Hello, Hello guys, my name is Bekka Bjorke. I'm a digital artist. I primarily work in concept art. I'm also an expat from the photography world, which is how I've got pulled in with all you cool kids. But I dabble in a bunch of different forms of art. I use a lot of 3D. I work in digital illustration, of course, various forms of photography, photo bashing and stuff like that. And I have been dabbling for fun, but also within my actual commercial work with AI for the last couple of years. So I'm kind of excited to get those gloves off with Renee and see where this next hour leads us.
With a lot of bruises, that's the goal. All right, so my name is Nicole York. I am a photographer, an author, and an artist. Most of my art is in illustration, so I'm going to be kind of taking the illustrator side a little bit since a couple of our illustrators had to drop off. So I'll try to play that role as well. But of course, also, you know, the host and founder here on the Artist Forge. So I'm really excited to have this conversation because not only am I excited about AI, but I have a lot of mixed feelings as well. And, you know, I could be swayed by the right arguments, but I feel pretty stable also in my position. So I'm curious to see how this is going to turn out. If you are in the audience today, we would love to hear from you. What do you do? And what are your initial thoughts on AI? Like, where do you stand right now? And if you know somebody who should be part of this conversation, make sure you tag them, share this with them really quick. Let folks know that we're here because we want to try to get as much input from the art community as possible. That's why we tried to include folks from a lot of different places within the art world just to see what opinions are like on the whole. So now that we know who everybody is, let's hear from everybody one at a time. Where do you stand right now? And if you're uncertain, that's totally cool as well. But where do you stand? And if you're in the audience today, I want to hear from you guys. Where do you stand? What are your thoughts on AI as it stands right now? Bekka, we'll start with you and go in reverse order this time. You're welcome.
You can get a short answer from me, I suppose. I'm very excited about the potential for AI generated artworks. And I think, what do I think? I have a lot of thoughts. I mean, I have my concerns as well. I think we can get a little bit more into the great question that so many people have expressed is like, what does this mean for art? Am I going to lose my job? Is this the end of my career? Should I quit and do something else? And I think the answer is no. The short answer is no. But I do think there are legitimate concerns with AI in the arts industry and within many other industries and how that affects how people work and what our job titles will be moving forward as this becomes more and more common. But overall, I'm so utterly inspired with what the options that are out there right now and what this can mean for idea development for people who don't necessarily have technical artistic skill sets, and how they can start to implement their own creative ideas and like dream worlds and all that stuff within the arts industry that they may have felt excluded from before. So overall, I'm very much a Team Robot.
One for Team Robot. All right. So Renee, where do you stand?
I'm very firmly in the middle on it because, I mean, on one hand, I'm always pro more people being able to access creativity. That's always going to be like my number one thing, which is like, yes, more people being able to express themselves in whatever way. But I also feel like in a lot of ways it makes us lazy. And, it does kind of cheapen it. I mean, already since this artwork, these programs have come out, I've already lost clients that normally hire me for, cover artwork and so on and so forth. And even though the artwork that they created they can't technically copyright it, they don't care. So like, I think it's going to wipe out a lot of people who made income from like lower level clients. And I think that can be really, really challenging for some people. But however, at the same time, like the potential of like what Team Robot can do is really, really, really cool. And I mean, this is like Pandora's opened the box. Like this is out and this is not going anywhere. So I think weirdly, I think the most interesting place that AI is going to influence is fashion. And I'm stoked about that. I'm really excited to see where fashion goes now that AI has been like creating all these new ideas for fashion designers. I think that is the most exciting part. I repeated myself twice. I apologize. I also have a cold. So.
No apologies needed at all. I love that. I also have seen some of the rad designs and dress designs and other things that people have kind of prompted out of AI. And I'm like, I need to own that, shoot that, do something like that. I need that to be part of my life. So I feel you there.
100% like put that on my body. I was just like,
yes. Put it on my body.
Yeah. Stitch that together and put it on me.
Yep, I'm with you there. Kate, what about you? What are your kind of initial, like, where do you stand right now with AI?
Well, I have many thoughts, and I don't think they've necessarily coalesced into a specific ideology about AI yet. Very much kind of conflicted. And I kind of see it from multiple angles. So I can see how in certain genres of photography or art, it could be really impactful. Like I see it as potentially more problematic in something like concept art or like book covers, like Renee was saying, stuff that's typically more conceptual anyway. But coming from the commercial photography realm, I feel, and we'll see what happens, but I feel like it's going to be a long while until AI can really start seriously impacting my career as a commercial photographer. I think you'll see some stuff where, people are going to latch onto the trends and agencies and clients are going to be like, "Ooh, our next campaign is going to be AI." But I think the nature of the commercial realm and the ideas from the ad agency and clientele and the language and how that's all communicated, I don't necessarily see the formwork of that changing significantly anytime soon due to AI. But what's interesting to me is, so a lot of my job is trying to communicate visually what a client or a brand is trying to articulate. And I think oftentimes the reason like an agency comes into play is that a client has difficulties conceptualizing what they want to see visually. And I think AI is definitely a tool that could probably be integrated more on that side of things, more in the concept and the design phase of things. So I think if anything, it's going to be more of a challenge or a problem for people on the agency side, like the art directors, rather than the photography side. Because ultimately, like if they've kind of chosen that photography is the aesthetic that they want for a campaign, we can use AI to kind of create our mood boards or our concepts or whatever. But ultimately, it's still going to get translated into photography, and someone has to be able to execute that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but based on what I've seen with AI so far, I don't think it has quite the finesse to be able to take all of those nuanced things, and it can get really granular in the commercial realm of like, this needs to be there and this has to be placed this way exactly. So I think it's going to be a while before that starts to really become a challenge in the commercial realm, but remains to be seen, I guess.
That makes a lot of sense. Before we get up to you, Dennis, I want to share just a couple thoughts really quickly from our audience today. So Kevin is joining us from the YouTube land, and he says, as a solo entrepreneur, I use AI tools to help increase my productivity. Currently, I mostly use AI tools for retouching, using the Retouch for Me plugins, PS Neural filters. If I was still doing weddings, I would use the AI tools available for culling images. Whatever tools I can use to increase my productivity / cut down my workload are a blessing to me. So some opinions I can definitely identify with coming in from Facebook land or from YouTube, and then some more friends showing up on Facebook. I wish I knew who you were. You have to give StreamYard permission to use your name. If you don't want to do that, just put your name before you type in your responses in.
It's Catboard Coats.
Oh, hi, my lovely Cat is with us today. All right, so Dennis, how about you? Where do you stand on AI right now?
Well, right now I'm sitting, so it's hard to say where I stand on something. But I'm kind of in the camp that Renee is, and the camp that Kate is, and also a little bit of a pro like Bekka. It looks like it would create some amazing stuff, and I experimented with Midjourney in the beginning, and like, wow, this is really cool, and came up with some crazy ideas and stuff. Like I think I tried a rabbit wearing armor with roses and came out like, wow, these are really fun. Something I would never have thought of, whatever, for that. So it was really easy to try to create something cool But what I found for myself was I would go down that rabbit hole really fast. And I have enough things that can serve as distractions for me. I have a hard enough time focusing on getting the work done when I don't have a deadline anyway. So if you gave me AI tools to play with all day, I'd get nothing done. So I kind of had to put the brakes on myself for that. Plus, you really quickly run out of the free service, and now you have to buy another subscription for it. And how many subscriptions can I basically support when it comes to having a business? I've got subscriptions for everything in the world. So how many more do I need to get? As far as the art itself, I agree with Kate. I don't think it's going to replace or impact the commercial side a whole lot that quickly. That's from two aspects. One, the copyright ability. Imagine being Ford Motor Cars and like, we're going to use this background, this AI background for something. And then GM says, great idea. We'll use that same one too. Well, now your exclusivity, the look of your ad campaign, all that stuff is gone, and you can't control it because you can't copyright that. You can't license it. Nobody can control who uses it. So that becomes an issue for it. I think for a lot of lower users, more mom and pop, regular people, we might see them like, I don't care if some other plumbing company uses the same image for that. So maybe there'll be, more impact on that end about it. But I don't see it affecting the high-end campaign a whole lot yet. The other thing is I'm always leery of tools where the bus is driving you. I want to drive the bus. It's fun to put in a prompt and see what random stuff comes up. But I remember back in the days in the 90s, Kai Krause had Kai's Power Tools. And they had all these amazing tools and stuff. And you hit the button and you get something really cool. And you hit the button again, and you get something really cool again. But you never had control over what you were getting. There was no predictability about it. So now with AI tools, you can put in prompts, but still there's a level of unpredictability about it. So it's going to take a lot of training and time to be able to come up with something predictable, which I don't know if clients are going to want to put in that amount of time versus have somebody like Bekka or Renee or Kate, like, here, use this tool. You figured out how to drive the bus. Get us something that we think is cool using that tool. So I think that's really more the way things are going to be going.
That makes a lot of sense. And it seems like so far what a lot of people are touching on is the kind of controllability, predictability, and also the ability to handle subtleties, like Kate was mentioning earlier, which I think is a really interesting aspect of that so far. So yeah, I love that. So Matt, where do you stand currently? What are your thoughts on AI?
It's hard to follow those 4 comments. So I'll try to come up with something original. I think, I've had a lot of conversations less about artificial intelligence in the art world and more about artificial intelligence in general. And, every time that I talk about it, someone inevitably brings up the Terminator and, these sentient beings and AI is going to take over and Skynet and all that. The thing is, people will ask, do I fear artificial intelligence in the art world? Do I fear artificial intelligence so that I'm going to lose my job? I don't fear the artificiality of AI. I fear the real stupidity of humanity that's programming it. I really fear that our own biases and values and slants are going to influence how these things get programmed. AI is nothing new. We've had punch cards and vacuum tubes and silicon chips for decades. So everything that we interact with now has some level of artificial intelligence working for it, right? We all talk about algorithms. So there it is in its most probably potent form right now. We're seeing it in real time. As it applies to art, I'm going to echo what a lot of folks have said. And I think there's the aspect of it being a tool. Right? We worried about moving from film to digital and now digital to AI. And the common thread through all of that is there has to be a human element to it. And where it stands right now, we are the human element. We are the ones that are able to control this. So if we can learn how to manipulate and create tools that are based on a standard set of ethics and controls, I think AI can be incredibly powerful. If we're looking at it from solely our own agenda, what it's going to do to my job or my artwork or whatnot, then we're losing sight of the bigger picture, which is how do we control technology like this before it starts to control us? And it's a really interesting argument when you start to talk about ethics and what is a cultural influence on the ethics of AI. US versus Russia versus Nigeria, right? What do people have as their ethical approach to AI? So when it comes to art, I'm very pro team robot. Learn how to tell more powerful stories. Use the tools that you have available to you in whatever form, but always be careful of this whirlwind that you have a lasso around, because you can lose hold of that pretty quickly and it can get out of control. So that's it.
I think that's a really fantastic metaphor there. And it is in a big way. I think most of the technology we have access to is very much like lassoing a whirlwind. I mean, you have a modicum of control over that, but it's a very, very powerful tool. And so easily it could outstrip our ability to manage. And you mentioned something I think that's really important for us to consider as we go forward, which is it is people who are building these programs. And if we're not careful, we will build our biases into these programs. And that we have already seen that with some of the facial recognition tools in biases already. People have been writing about that. So definitely something to keep in mind.
Yeah, on the topic of like keeping control of it, I honestly think that going forward, a lot of studios, that have budget, they'll build their own, AI art programs with their own assets. And like that will 100% wipe a lot of people out of work. And you'll be training for programming jobs instead. But I mean, why wouldn't they, right? When they can be like, oh, okay, we just need some people punching in front of the computer, putting in prompts. And I mean, we've seen how quickly, Mid-Journey a couple weeks ago was absolutely garbage at faces, and now it's starting to figure it out. Like DALL-E was horrible and like junk, like what, 6 months ago or less, and now it's almost photorealistic. So I think that like for big studios and film studios to not be researching that and writing their own stuff, to think they're not going to be doing that is, I think, very naive.
I agree with what Renee's saying. One of the things in my mind is always when we see these programs hit with such ferocity and so much popularity is what are we giving them? They give us a free account to do 10 versions or whatever like that. And then they con us into $10 a month for this, but we're giving them an awful lot. And what is that? We're training their equipment, their program to do something. And is that going to help us or hurt us? And that's a huge question about it.
Yeah,
I think it's
testers.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying we're giving them free beta testing. You're welcome, Mid-Journey.
Yeah, I think more than anything, like it's such an incredible, because there's millions of people all around the world putting in prompts into this program. What an incredible data mine of cultures, of like who's searching what are the most common searches in these countries, in these countries, in these countries, and then you link that in with the Facebook data and with everything else, and it's all like that is incredible data mining. So yeah, okay, woo, it's making art, but also that is an amazing look into like the subconscious and like the goals and the hopes and fears of people, and what those trends are around the world. And that is a lot of data that everyone's just been like handing the fuck over. Sorry if you don't allow that word on here.
No, do it.
So from like a cultural security standpoint, it makes me very uncomfortable, and I really don't like that part at all. Because like, who the hell's actually behind it? Oh, well, this guy who created this other program, and that's all you can find on it. Like,
yeah, I think the temperature in the room just dropped about 30 degrees with what it gave me chills.
It's true.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, we're all having this conversation of like, oh, we're gonna have our jobs, and you're like, but hold on a second, like that is like millions of inputs. And like, how do they trend around the world? Like, on one hand, that's super interesting, and I think that's really cool, and I would love to be able to see that data. But also, who the hell's data mining all of this, and where is it going?
Well, and to Matt's point, you referenced the algorithm, right? Like, this is already being implemented, right? And this is just an extension of that, or a different kind of format that's taking. And, obviously everyone's got lots of concerns about the algorithm and how that's being implemented. And there's no ethics to that, really. It's just creating kind of feedback loops. And yeah, and I don't know how that would correlate to the art world, but we've already seen how this like excessive gathering of people's data and the information that they want to digest has been implemented via social media. What does that mean in the art world? And I don't know anyone knows the answer to that question, but
it's going to be interesting to find out, isn't it?
Yeah.
I want to grab a couple comments really quickly from our friends in the audience. So David is here with us today. Hello, David. He says, I downloaded some Russian AI retouching plugins and they're amazeballs. Erica with us today, saying, great point so far. I've been resistant to jump on the AI bus mid-journey because of the lack of control, as Dennis pointed out. And of course, the wonderful and lovely Kelly is here with us today. Hello, gorgeous lady. And those are some really fantastic points. So this is a huge ball of yarn, right? Like we have just the programs themselves and what they are providing for people who are using them. But then we have the greater ball of wax that we're not really paying attention to, all of this information that we are handing over. And then how will that be used? How will that affect the world at large? So there's a lot to consider here, and a lot of directions we could potentially go in. But I wanted to bring up just a couple of things really quickly. The kind of common comments that I have received from people. So I asked folks a couple days ago, what are your thoughts? How are you thinking about AI right now? And for some people, they were super excited to have access to creativity, as Bekka mentioned earlier, and Renee, you said as well. Some folks who maybe did not have a whole lot of technical skills to be able to render some of their ideas, and now they have access to these kind of worlds of imagination that they hadn't been able to access before. And then the other side is, of course, folks who are like, this is lazy, this is pushing artists out of jobs, this is going to mean the end of a whole lot of people's career. Those folks who are kind of on the, I don't want to say the lower end, but those jobs are kind of lower paying jobs. If you were to take the, entire art industry as a spectrum, those folks who are in the beginning to the middle are definitely in danger of losing jobs for book covers and for illustrations for their businesses or design work for their logos. There, a lot of things that are going to be much cheaper for people to use AI than to hire an artist. So looking at things from those kind of two opposing perspectives, do we see this as an absolute danger to folks in the art world?
I don't see it that way. And I know, Renee, you're just about to jump in, so apologies. I don't see it that way. Again, I see it as tools, right? The bigger thing is how it's controlled going on. We had the same conversation when cell phones started taking pictures. Oh my God, everyone's going to start taking pictures and all photographers are going to be out of business. We're all still working, right? And I think there's this, the bigger issue that I see is this culture of good enough. What's good enough? And there are people that are like, I just need a selfie for LinkedIn. I'm going to take it with my cell phone rather than go to a photographer. And I think you're going to see art directors and creative directors that are saying, I can produce this in AI. It'll be good enough for this. But when we need a professional, we'll bring the professional in. So I think it's more of a mindset and an approach to what is the value that it's able to provide. Is it cost cutting? Is it speed and efficiency? Is it just good enough? And that's where I see the divisiveness coming in the art world, is separating out what's good enough using this tool versus what is created by a professional and direct human interaction. I think you're going to have both. It's just a matter of where do you find yourself in that gray area? Do you find yourself team robot or team human, right? But it's just a tool, just like anything else that we've been transitioning to over the years.
I think in a lot of ways, like I agree with you there, but I mean, also, I think what it's also doing, and the cell phone cameras had a huge impact on, like, even just like the little point and shoot cameras that we used to have, right? Like it just annihilated that entire industry, so you can't say there wasn't an impact. But also, like, the AI art is going to do, I think, two things. One thing, it'll wipe out a lot of the Fiverr people who get work, which I think is really unfortunate because there's a lot of artists around the world in like second and third world countries who have access to computers who are doing these jobs, and it's giving them income. And I think in a lot of ways it will affect people who take those kinds of jobs negatively. And that is, I think, somewhat concerning, but also we can't change it. On the flip side, though, some of the a lot of the AI art that's coming out is actually really interesting and really good and really fun. And like, yeah, okay, Midjourney has a look, but only for like people who enter those certain types of prompts. I've seen a lot of like really cool artwork where I was like, holy shit, that was Midjourney. Like, that's awesome. So I think the other thing that'll happen is it will raise everyone's taste in what good art is. So it will force, digital creators like myself to actually step up and make better artwork, because like an AI program, like there's stuff that Midjourney does. I look at that, I'm like, I actually can't make that. I don't know how to make that. That's really inspiring for me. So it is definitely like, it's two things where I think a lot of people who rely around the world on those lower income jobs are basically getting annihilated, and they're going to have to figure out something else. But on the flip side, like, all of a sudden we're going to have clients who have good taste, hopefully, and we're going to have to be able to deliver that.
That's very optimistic, Renee.
Right?
That's very optimistic.
I try. I'm like a raging optimist as much as I try. But I mean, like for example, I mean, remember what good tattoos were in the 80s and 90s, and they were they were garbage. They were really bad. But then all of a sudden, social media came along and everyone saw artwork from around the world, and it leveled up tattoo artists. So like now when we see, what really good tattoo art is, people have a standard that didn't exist 20 years ago because nobody knew what was available out there. And it inspired an entire industry to really level up their game and create incredible tattoo artwork. And I think AI has a similar impact.
You make an interesting point there too, because I think we're looking at AI and the impact of AI through the lens of what's currently available and how we currently digest information, visual information. Obviously it feels like, to me, it feels like super saturated already. And I feel like I'm constantly bombarded by visual information since basically the advent of social media. But what does introducing AI mean in terms of how we are going to digest information in the future? Like, have we reached critical saturation and AI is just going to add something else on top of things? Or are we going to reframe how we're absorbing visual information, and is AI going to impact that at all? And I don't know. But, when we talk about things like transitioning from digital to film, or film to digital, yes, there was a change in material, but the whole industry kind of changed as well. And the way that we were able to create content, the way that, and then, with the introduction of social media, how we're presenting this information, is social media as it is going to maintain in its current incarnation? Is that going to evolve? Is AI going to impact that? So I think, it can be kind of scary thinking about AI in the context of today's framework, where we have, this is our way of absorbing information. We can only get this much out to so many people. But there may be a kind of shift in information processing that comes along with the introduction of AI as a more, steeped part of culture, for better or for worse.
Yeah, there's a couple things I want to add. But first, I want to make sure we can get to some of the comments really quickly. We've got some really fantastic stuff happening in the comments section. So with all the ease of writing out a prompt on a free platform, another side of the coin, this will perhaps push people into more of a human-made subcultures and value man-made products or art more. And I think, we're seeing this with some of the folks who, after the rise of digital, made themselves kind of a very niche market for film, and they would do everything themselves. And folks were willing to pay a high price for those people to do it specifically that way. And of course, that means that we have to be aware of this stuff and market ourselves properly and be able to communicate the value of what we're doing in a way that made with these hands matters. And I think that also is one of the interesting kind of renaissances that we might see. So that's super interesting. David saying, it's weird though, because there's sites like Creative Market with the templates to basically do the job for you. And yet people hire designers still because they don't want to be bothered to learn. And I think that's also a really great point that plays into your observation there, Renee, about, the artists on Fiverr and that entire group. And it's interesting. I actually happened to watch a video just recently as I was trying to intake as much information as possible for this talk, where somebody took a AI, and I think they were either using Midjourney or DALL-E, and then artists on Fiverr, and gave them the exact same brief. So essentially a prompt is like the brief that you would give to your creative, right? And compared them with each other. And interestingly enough, a lot of the artists below the $200 mark were just scalping images from the internet and pushing them as their own work. And so when people get very upset about the idea that AI is going to be stealing jobs, artists are already doing this. They are already stealing the work of others or passing it off as their own. That is already a large part of the market, particularly in that area, because it can be done very, very quickly. So I think that's kind of an interesting subtlety that we can look at when it comes to that side of the market and how they're going to be affected, because some of the artists actually did push, they went and used, it looked Midjourney to me, but they went and used that and then turned it in as their own. And the guy was like, this artist obviously worked very hard on this piece. And I was like, that is definitely not handmade. But the thing is, if you get it right, people can't tell. And there's a whole aspect there that I want to make sure that we talk about. I know, Bekka, we've talked about this before in some of the Artist Forge conversations, but it's about the human interpretation of what we see and what we smuggle into a piece of art that isn't always explicitly there, even if it was not made by a human. So I'm hoping we'll be able to get to that eventually. Kelly saying, things change so quickly. Don't we just learn to adapt? Kevin saying, I don't see art producers using these tools. What could happen is APs and ADs hiring people who are skilled at creating AI renderings to produce images. We've got a lot more that I'm going to try to get to as many people as I can. But definitely looking at, from my perspective, and I've already used AI in a few commissioned pieces in a very similar way that I would use if I was going to photo bash, works that I bought from another artist. I have memberships to a couple of platforms where people sell their work, and I couldn't find anything that I wanted. I couldn't find anything that fit what was in my head. And so I went in and I gave it a prompt and I dialed it in a little bit, and then I had something that I wanted and that was usable. So, and then complementing that with the additional work that I do, the additional photo bashing and painting and all of those kinds of things to make a finished product, gives my clients something that they're really happy with and cuts down on the amount of time I have to spend painting by a good 75%. So we have a lot of comments I want to be able to get to, but.
Nicole, I think in the comments, Earth has a great comment about Moore's Law, about how fast this technology is going, and Moore's Law being, the speed that technology grows versus chip size and all that sort of stuff. So I think the thing that interested me about that comment is that the AI is outpacing the current state of law as well, right? So it's this wild west of roads that we can drive down, and there's no cops, there's no speed traps, there's no nothing, right? You can drive all over the road. That's kind of where we're at right now with AI, especially in the art world, intellectual property and copyright law, where things are happening so fast, there aren't laws to address it. So it's all coming down to what's our best approach to how to handle these situations. So until we can come up with some controls around that, I think we're just going to keep having these conversations over and over and over. But I thought that was really, really insightful of Earth to talk about that and how fast it's moving versus everything else. It's great that we have it. Are we ready for it? Right? To use it in a capable way. That makes sense?
Just because we can doesn't mean we should.
I'll pull the Jeff Goldblum out here. Sure.
I appreciate that. Really quickly, I want to welcome Kevin Bjorke with us today. Kevin is Bekka's dad, and he has some really great insight into the AI side of the industry. So Kevin, first, thank you so much for joining us on late notice. I'm really glad you could be here. and would love to hear a little bit about what you do so folks know a little bit more about you.
Sure. So going backwards, well, let me see. I just got back from the annual SIGGRAPH conference, among other things, which some folks here might be familiar with. It's the annual big computer graphics conference, and the first one we've had live for a while. But yeah, my background is I've worked at a lot of film studios, movies, television and video games, but I've also done AI work in both image recognition and image generation and other kinds of related topics. You have a couple of patents in that realm, but I have a very pragmatic attitude about AI. I think that AI is probably going to just get folded into any other kind of art practice, right? I mean, you're using tools to make something that is going to mean something to someone, and no matter what, the top 1% of what, however many pictures you have is still the top 1%, right? So, you can make, today you can go out with a digital camera and make 1,000 pictures in, 5 minutes, but 2 or 3 will be the best. And, so that's, I think that's truthfully what it's going to be. Just as, people will wring their hands and they'll gnash their teeth about developments in new technology. You can find people complaining about the idea. You find photographers in the 1880s complaining about how this stupid George Eastman, by putting film or putting emulsion on a piece of glass, made it almost so easy that basically all you have to do is have a horse and a carriage and a dark room, but you don't have to coat the glass yourself, and it's ruining the art of photography. Long before he made the actual Kodak, right? So it's, stuff changes, but just you got to surf on it. You just got to charge with it, because it's not going to stop because you're feeling indignant about it.
I love that. You actually just used a metaphor that I've used several times, which is when these big waves of technology come along, you either learn to ride it or you get swamped by it. And for folks who are very angry right now, it feels like there's really kind of 2 options. There is, you either lean very hard into this was all done by hand, this is a handmade piece, and that is the reason it's valuable. Or you turn around and you go, I better figure out how to use these tools and be the best at them so I can end up, which is, that comment earlier, up in that top 1%, because that's where the majority of the money is at. And it's difficult, I think, for those of us on the lower 3/4 of the spectrum to sometimes accept the fact that we really do have to level up either our clientele, our skill, both, et cetera, in order to continue to be valuable in our field when things like this come along,
Right. I mean, and often it's just a matter of, what the value of art is. If someone's willing to pay $50,000 for a JPEG of a fluffy Birkin bag, then what are you going to do?
This is true. So we have a couple comments coming in. Kelly saying, I don't find it overwhelming. I find it exciting. The amount of people I see who are excited and finding a spark that has dimmed is amazing. Whatever it takes for people to be creative and feel empowered, I am all for. And I am definitely in that more pragmatic mindset as well. The first thing I thought of is, this is going to give me so many environments that I can use like really, really fast without having to, without having to paint them all by hand. I can maybe do some overpainting or something to integrate them into my style. But I absolutely have a pragmatic approach to that. As we start getting close to the end of the hour, I want to make sure that we, if you're in the audience today and you have any thoughts, make sure you put them in there so we can get to them. If you have any questions, be sure to ask them now. If you have a question for a specific member of the panel, go ahead and add that as well so we know who you're talking to. So Renee, I noticed you had unmuted also.
I had a point, but then the cold brain took over and then I forgot it and I was like, shit.
I know. I'm sitting here like, I think my fever's going up a little bit. My brain fog is just getting worse.
I have a question
yes.
since I dragged my poor father in from his dinner and evening and whatever he's doing. Since most of us up here and within our general kind of artist sports community mostly live within the photography realm, the dabbling of illustration, I'm curious, Bjorke Sr., do you see, how do you see like this massive influx and advancement in AI generated art just over the last like 6 months, a year, impacting the film industry based on your experience there?
Yeah, I think that partly, I think it's easy to think like, oh, this is going to change the way that we make pieces of artwork that are inputs to the film industry. And I actually think that the impact is really not so much on the film industry itself, which is actually kind of shrinking and has been for a while, right? I mean, yeah, it's expanding on video, but at the same time, like the big studio pictures and stuff, they're either Marvel pictures and various kinds of sequels, or it's kind of a deflationary market. But I think that in the last few months, the problem with using AI for artwork in the film industry is usually the fact that you can use it for mood boards, you can use it for concept stuff, but you can't have the director can't come in and say like, could it be like that, but a little bit more Moroccan, or I mean, sometimes they'd be very vague and they'll just say, can it be more religious? And other times they'll say, well, can you please just move those trees about 15 pixels to the left, right? And depending on, it's not directable. But I think that the AI artwork is going to, if in fact your artwork, however you want to define artwork, is where its target is really to be an 800 pixel across header on some ad that you want people to look at, that's just ephemeral and disappears, and might even be very clearly focused for that individual thing, right? The film industry is all about like, I made this thing and now 3 million people watch it. But AI and computers and internet distribution can be, the computer made this one thing and it only got seen by you. And if you clicked on it, it's going to give you more of those. Different kind of media entirely.
So what we might be seeing then is just kind of the birth of an entirely new way of consuming media.
I think that we're already seeing that. I think that we're already in the age where I think social media in some ways is already fading out, because what's less important than your friends and the people whose images you might see, the recommendation algorithms are already beating them in terms of like generating clicks, and that what generates clicks generates revenue, and what generates revenue generates more of it. So I actually think that the AI inputs, the recommendation system is already killing off to a certain degree, like the fake friends, the Kardashian class, professional people who get followed, and I think the AI generation will clobber even more of it. What matters is getting clicks for advertisers. Unfortunately, that's what the whole thing's driven on.
So
Indeed.
Yeah.
David left a comment just now on Facebook. He says, I wonder how AI generated art will spill into VR and metaverse content. And I've seen this idea expressed by various people who've been exploring AI generated art about being able, again, tapping into that creativity they don't have the technical skill to otherwise create, right? That if they can generate images, they can generate something in VR and share this experience, this intimate experience with something that they wanted to create out of their own heart and soul with friends. In that different home. We're not looking for 30 million viewers. We just want to share it with each other. It almost creates that brand new sense of media and that experience of media that we haven't really had before. At least it has the potential to, I think. Yeah.
Well, there are things you can do with photogrammetry and little handheld lidars. And Rebecca, you might remember I was working on those a few years back. And or right now the big rage is NERFs, neural radiance fields, where you take a small handful of pictures and then it's able to successfully create a 3D experience out of just a handful of snapshots from your phone. Those are about grabbing objects out of the world, right, or places. I haven't yet seen very much in the way of someone saying, "Oh, I'm going to use that to make a piece of artwork that's actually moving or touching or gets you right here." But maybe that's my challenge to everybody. Just go download some photogrammetry software and make something great.
I think you make an interesting point there. And I think this is one of the things that I think people have a lot of fear about with AI is more of an existential one. Like if, the highest calling of humanity is to be an artist, right? Like that people have said, once we've kind of, surpassed all of the utility of humanity. What's left is just to create, right? Because this is kind of this, just inherently human thing to do, and it creates meaning, but it's not derived from anything other than generating pleasure. So I think people fear that AI will overtake that, but I think, kind of to your point, I think there's always going to be sort of this human element, and like a lot of people have said, AI is really the tool, because at least as of now, it can't generate the meaningfulness, and it can't generate the these kind of underlying themes and then the subtleties within an image. Hopefully it won't come to that, and there will always need to be that human element. But I think that there's a lot of fear around AI because of this sort of existential thought of, if we're obsolete as creators, then what is our purpose as human beings?
I think one of the things that, to get to David's question as well about AI generated art and metaverse and VR, right? We have to remember that artificial intelligence is built for efficiency of production, right? So we're trying to get from A to B much faster using the power of computers. So as it relates to metaverse and VR and augmented reality, everything that we do, hey, take that 10-year challenge, show me what you look like 10 years ago, right? All that is facial recognition technology and low-level programming of this type of AI. So as we move forward, think about this. You're looking on your phone, you're walking down the street, you bring it up, it's augmented reality. Now AI is starting to generate things based on your preferences in artwork, your preferences in the things that you want to see, right? So as we start to look at art, is it going to become a very personalized type of production? Whereas we utilize social media, right? We're already being programmed by recommendations. So why not just enhance that with artwork, right? So I think as we expand into the metaverse and VR and AR, this is where the personalization of it comes. Right now, it's just very wide open and there's a lot of inputs. The outputs are going to start being what we desire individually. And that's where the corporations are going to be able to utilize this to target. Right. And this sounds all tinfoil hat. It's not meant to be. But what I'm saying is, like, eventually it will start to leak into the things that we use every day and providing us with the things that we want to see. Why would the art world be any different than advertising for socks? Right.
It's not.
So I think that
it's happening now.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I'm super interested in the whole augmented reality and what that's going to mean for us. But I do want to touch on what you said, Kate, about that kind of existential feeling is, so we did kind of a fun experiment in the Artist Forge one day. We each went and used a kind of a low-level AI program to make random pieces of art. And they were very much abstract, but we sat there and we digested them and we critiqued them as if they were real pieces of art, as if we had gone to some artist and picked their art. And it was surprising and not surprising at the same time that art is not an I made a thing, it's going to make you feel this way, here you go. It's a very much a three-way conversation between the artist, the medium, and the person who is consuming the art. And we are smuggling meaning into everything we see because that's the way our brain works. We're pattern-making machines, we're meaning-making machines. So when we see something, even if it wasn't created with human hands, we can very easily smuggle meaning into that as the viewer, taking our experiences and our biases and everything that comes along with us and seeing that and going, I have already seen several pieces of AI work that I went, oh God, that reminds me of what it felt like to be a little kid and feel like magic was still in the world. And it didn't require, an artist sitting in their studio, starving and struggling over how to communicate. It took 5 minutes, maybe, in a couple of prompts.
But you're still generating something. Like it's your intellectual input that's going into this and dictating what is going to come out of it. It still requires input on your end.
For now, right?
So on that, Kelly left a comment too that I think is very interesting. I was thinking kind of about this too. I have 10 friends outside the photo community who have delved into AI. I've discovered that the output of the images that people have been exploring with are very, very different based on who's making them. So the photo world, I feel like everything I've seen out of photographers, looks a very certain way. And I feel like everything I've seen out of super geeky computer nerds on Reddit looks very, very different, and not at all like what the people who are coming from the art industry already are creating. So I think that also speaks to that level of artistry that Kate is talking about that goes into this authorship of the prompt. And I think we kind of touched on that earlier. I think Kevin might have mentioned as well, Kevin, in the comments about like prompt engineers becoming a job in the future. So your art director is not going to hire a team of art or concept artists. They're going to be hiring a team of prompt engineers, which is still a necessary art form because there is this level of syntax of understanding the language to speak to the machine to get the appropriate and desired response. And not everyone's going to do that. Not everyone's going to get the same thing. And on the more kind of civilian side, I was talking to a friend the other day who's a mathematician and a philosopher. So he's artistic, but he's not artistic in the way that those of us sitting up here are. He does very different kinds of art. And he told me that it was comforting to know that there was this intelligent algorithmic art out there and these incredibly powerful machines, and people were using it to make memes and to make bad jokes. And that was the human reaction, was to go have fun and not do something sinister with it. And I've been holding on to that.
I like that too.
Yeah. Bekka touches on something that I think is really critical, is in my view, one of the hardest things to do about creating art is concepting, coming up with a concept. And that's where the prompts come in. You might get really, really good and really skilled at writing prompts, but you got to start with some sort of a concept. And that's where we're creating really the most meaningful art. So there's lots and lots of art going to be created, just like there is now. Lots and lots of people shooting stuff without concept. Might make pretty pictures, might not. Like, how many pictures of a pretty girl in a bikini on a beach can I look at?
So many.
Right. But there's really no concept behind that, so it's not compelling for that. And I think that's where things are going to differentiate. I don't know if AI is going to develop to a point where it can create concepts like humans do. If it does, well, that could be a really scary situation. But that's, I think,
I can't wait to see the first fully AI Marvel movie. I know it's going to happen one day. Fully AI.
I'm really thinking this idea of kind of some of the art coming from the idea and the prompt is going to be great for those of us who are writers and have hyperphantasia. I feel like we're going to be on top of the world with that stuff, all of us hyperphantasia freaks. But I mean, that does make it really interesting, because we've talked before about the fact that I had a really great conversation with a cinematographer, I want to say a year and a half ago. Might have been 2 years, but I have always been of the opinion that the idea is meaningless. It's the execution that's important. How do you take that idea and turn it into a real thing? And the way that I do that is going to be different than the way that you do that. And so if you and I were both given the same brief and somebody told us, hey, go into Midjourney and go create some kind of a fairy castle, what I choose, what prompts I choose, and what variations I choose, and all of those kinds of things are still going to be absolutely based on my style and my interests and my history, my background, all of that kind of stuff. And yours will be the same. Whatever you choose is still going to be based on who you are. And so I think it's interesting to remove some of the technique from it and focus really on honing the idea until the idea is enough, which I think is a really, really interesting concept.
It's also true that prompts are the mechanism that people are using to use style of AI called the transformer, where you simultaneously train the transformer to recognize words and pictures together, and then new combinations of words create new combinations of pixels, and they can, without getting too much into the details, it doesn't have to actually be language. And so it doesn't have to be a spoken human language. And so the computers are going to become increasingly facile at using different kinds of inputs that you might use as an input. And, in that way, maybe it might literally be physically brush-like motions, or it might be that it's just an analytic system that feeds you pictures that it thinks you like because it's been monitoring your eyeballs and watching what you pay attention to, which is kind of creepy and wonderful at the same time. That's, as most things are.
One of the things I've always wondered with the AI stuff, though, that I haven't thought about really is how the prompts, is there a difference if you put the same prompts in different languages? So if you type it in Mandarin versus Arabic versus Russian versus English, does it actually deliver a different result? I haven't thought about that before, and now I'm curious.
The other thing that is really fascinating to me is the potential for use of emotional language, right? Like if you enter sad in, or if you enter happy in, or mourning, you know, these terms have such different interpretations depending on you and your psyche, and you know, happy to you may be different than happy from another person, and that's so personalized. And you know, does eventually we reach this scenario where AI just kind of creates the average of everyone's version of happy, and that's kind of, you know, their definition of that? Or is that going to be this continuously evolving, you know, expression?
That's really interesting to think about. I want to grab a couple of comments, and then we have to start kind of getting some final thoughts and closing down for today. But Kevin is saying, to Nicole's point, a great interrogator to draw out the desired result from people who don't have that same level of knowledge. And I think, you know, those of us who have worked in any kind of art development, whether you're a photographer who's talking to a client and trying to understand what they need, or whether you are, you know, getting a brief and you're trying to really figure out exactly what's in that, that ability to kind of hone and create concepts and bring them to life is still going to be really important, I think, no matter which tools we're using. So being able to do that, I think, is a skill many artists probably could you know, hone and improve upon. And then Kelly saying, I would love to see a group of people put their personal prompts on one specific idea and see the similarities and differences. I think we should definitely do that. That would be a really great exercise. I have done a little bit of that myself as I'm coming up with ideas for a new series that I'm writing. I decided to take a location I have in my head for a location in the novel, and I asked the AI to give me several different versions of it using the styles of different artists. So I did a Studio Ghibli look one. I used Arthur Rackham. I just kind of went through a list of artists that I found you know, may fit the kind of style. And while all of the locations were a similar location, the styles were broadly different. And so, you know, even using that, we're relying on human art as a kind of touchstone to direct the styles that come about. So an interesting thing. All right, so as we begin to close down for today, I want to ask everybody just to kind of give a final thoughts and maybe answer this question. Is AI going to destroy art careers? And if it is, what happens because of that? So,
can I go first again?
Yes, you can.
I still stand by the fact that no, I don't think AI is going to destroy art careers. And the final point I wanted to make is I don't feel like we got deep enough into like the horrible existential dread that has accompanied this year's technological advancements. But I feel like it's very important to say that a lot of that dread and all the potential scary problems that artificial intelligence presents are problems with capitalism. They're not problems with the technology. And so when people are worried about their jobs, what that means for junior artists, these are capitalist problems because we rely on the need to make money. I think there also can be some financial wins there. Like when Kate asked for, the first AI generated Marvel movie. I saw an article yesterday about Neil Gaiman's The Sandman on Netflix potentially not getting a second season because even though it's been like the #1 show on Netflix for like the last couple of weeks, it's too expensive. People love it. They want more. It's too expensive. So does this technology now offer this opportunity for the reduction of costs to give people more of what they want? Does it reduce costs for things like indie film developers or indie game developers or just artists who don't have that money to put towards creating incredible things to connect with other people? I think it opens up some wonderful opportunities there. But those issues with us being priced out because they don't want to hire a team or they don't want to hire a book cover designer or whatever, those are purely capitalist problems. They aren't anything that actually, I think, attacks our ability as artists or our human desire to create art that humans as a species have always chased. I think that is constant and that will always be there regardless of what technology is available. Okay, I'm done.
Have fun following that one up, guys.
Well, I'll follow it up. I have no problem with that. So, as a capitalist, right, I think it really does come down to, I agree with a lot of what you were saying, Bekka. I think we're a long way from C3PO and R2D2 creating art and putting us all out of work, right? So, I think what we're up against is, again, the human element and the ethics and the control and the manipulation of the tool rather than the tool itself, right? How is it going to be used? How is it going to be infiltrated by larger corporations and employed in ways that work its way into our lifestyle so that art becomes a commodity? And now it can just be generated from everywhere. And the artists themselves becomes a very, very niche product. So I think there's a lot that people are worrying about now that are not worries now and probably won't be for decades. However, with things moving so quickly, if we don't put in some of the controls and the levers right now to make sure that we're putting in the checks and balances, to make sure that things don't happen down the road, then it can go off the rails really quickly. So just like any technology, the power is with us to make sure that it doesn't start to turn against us. Not in a Skynet way, but just it doesn't get out of control and start to manipulate large groups of people because of money.
I'll just agree with that, because you should never be afraid of computers. You should be afraid of people with computers.
Correct.
I think I want to build on what Bekka and Matt both said. One of the things that struck me the most was, like, Nicole, when you talked about using it to come up with sketches for your book. One of the friends on Facebook, when I mentioned this talk, friend Lisa Carney mentioned that she thought the thing it was going to affect mostly was, like, in advertising work, like what we do. It starts off with a sketch artist, just sketching out rough ideas based on what art directors or somebody tell them to do. I think that kind of work is going to be affected for that. And what's going to happen is we're going to have to adapt. And just like everything else, we're going to have to learn how to adapt and change and deal with this new tool and the possibilities that it presents. I'm not sure it's going to affect the high end of things. I'm not sure it's going to affect the commercial market in a great way. But, like Matt said, we do need to put in some safeguards for that. Whether or not capitalism will be interested in putting those safeguards is something that gives me deep concern. And then the other thing, the most chilling thought about it is what Renee touched on earlier about what we're teaching these things about us culturally. The more we give them ability to get inside our brain and see what we think about where our emotions lie, where our thoughts lie, the easier we are to manipulate. And already Amazon hits us with a flood of suggestions like, oh, you might like this, you might like that, you might like that. Like, good Lord, once all that data starts getting wrapped into one big data source and being fed to us, it's going to be really, really difficult to avoid that. And we're going to have to become really smart about disciplining ourselves not to follow those prompts.
Yeah, I just want to know who's behind these programs, really. Like, whose idea was it? Like, hey, I have this really awesome idea. And of course, this is tinfoil hatty and probably not how it went down. But also, it's not impossible of someone being like, what's a really great way? Because, we've all seen what happened with Cambridge Analytica. We know that these people sometimes are out there where you're just like, hey, what's a really great way to get a bunch of data from people? And what do they really think about? What are their hopes, their dreams, their nightmares? Oh, let's make a really awesome, machine learning software that millions of people around the world are going to input their data. And then, at first it's going to be clunky and but eventually it's going to get good because it's machine learning and that's what it does. And then we have these huge amounts of data on top of, because right now, their searches, the information that we're giving out is the stuff that we want to buy and the stuff that we're looking at and but it doesn't really talk about who we are and what we want and what we dream about.
And that's where art is.
And we're handing that all over to companies that we don't really know what they're doing with this information. And so I'm hoping that there is a benevolent dictator behind it all. But sometimes there isn't, and there probably isn't. But, but I think, though, that we should be mindful when we're using these types of technologies, to be considering what exactly we're giving away. But on the flip side, I'm so excited to see what it does for fashion. There's a part of me, it's just like, oh yeah, AI artwork, concept art, whatever. I can't wait to see how it influences clothing design in the future. And I'm just I'm so stoked about that part. So on one hand, I don't like how much stuff we give away, but on the other hand, clothes are going to get so much more interesting.
I just had to push on that because you specifically said that this information is going to companies. And this again goes to my angry leftist anti-capitalism opinion.
But you're thinking companies, but I'm thinking like, dictatorships and like, like that kind of stuff. They're real. We can't deny that there are regimes around the world that are highly controlled of their populace and their populations and what they do with that information. And we know that, again, like how our data is used against other countries around the world, right? So that is concerning. And so the AI artwork stuff, I just can't help but wonder, like, what are they doing with it all? Hopefully nothing. But to think that there isn't a regime out there with a lot of money behind it going like, oh, hey, that's a really good idea. How do we make something addictive? Like, oh my God, TikTok. Like to think that those things aren't real is naive.
It didn't have to be a regime. We already saw that happen in the last 2 presidential elections where they were using deep data to understand the words that would persuade people.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm going with this. And so with AI artwork, we are really handing over a part of ourselves. Well, AI, machine learning artwork, because let's be honest, this isn't actually AI. It's machine learning artwork. We are handing over a language that other data hasn't been able to access before. And is that generating amazing results? And is it really inspiring? And does that give access to creativity to a lot of people who didn't have it before? Yes. And do I love that? Yes. But it's so much data.
I think we have
what you originally said about where, like, who came up with this shit, right? Like, whose idea was it to do this to us? And I feel like there's like these very interesting kind of cultural differences when you start expanding outside your own industry. And again, like the attitudes and the thoughts like that you artists or other artists like that I've seen and heard and read are very different than, say, the thoughts from programmers or the thoughts from writers, or and so like the people at least from my understanding, everything I've heard from people who've been working in AI development, they are excited about very different things. And it isn't malicious. It becomes malicious when it ends up in the hands of those regimes.
That's my point. That's exactly my point.
Concepts there, no, it's fun and it's exciting and someone had a great idea, and it's that same feeling we get when we imagine a picture just with a different art medium.
Well, and more to the point,
she's so sparkly. Let her have her happiness.
It has the capacity to be this empathetic creation engine that brings people together. But so did social media, and look how that's turning out. So it's just a question of, are we as humanity emotionally capable of taking that leap? Jury's still out on that. I don't have high hopes on that. But on a completely different tangent, I will say one thing that I am curious to see is the impact of AI on 3D CG development. I think it has a huge potential to create a lot more work in that field, simply because if we can imagine things that are not practical to create physically, but now we can create the visual language to like create these things, right? Then I feel like so for instance, I'm picturing like an art director like trying to come up with an ad for a brand, and they're like, oh, I want to like build this kind of world, but like we can't practically shoot that and we can't construct it out of a set because that's nonsense. I just feel like that is going to create more opportunities for people in the 3D CGI world, and kind of a way to fabricate digitally these sort of ideas that are generated through AI. And I'm already seeing that a lot, like more and more I'm getting asked to bid on jobs that have a CG element to them. So it's already trending that way. I think AI is just going to push that even further. So if you're on the fence about CG, then maybe here's an opportunity to kind of explore that realm too, and just kind of evolve your the artistic process. I guess we're all going to have to evolve and change somehow to adapt to changing trends, changing industries, these new tools. So it's kind of just like, pick your poison at this point.
so much to think about in this conversation, and it's so big, and there's so many different threads that we could pull on to go in a million different directions. One thing stuck out to me that I just want to touch on really quickly, and I think, Kevin, you mentioned this earlier, in that as the algorithms get better at determining what it is we like, it's just going to show us more of the art we like, and so that experience of being an art consumer is going to become incredibly personalized, which is super cool and fucking dangerous, because what that does is keeps you in a bubble, right? The same way that our social media algorithms have kind of created these comfortable bubbles for us where we only hear opinions we agree with. And then all of a sudden, when you're not exposed to art that challenges you, which has been one of the most powerful ways we have challenged thoughts and beliefs throughout history, is with great art, right? And writing as well. But anyway, the point is, if you're not ever exposed to art that challenges you, you start to calcify inside. If you can't feel things based on something you didn't expect, or maybe you didn't even want initially, I think that's some of the great value of art. So hopefully we keep that in mind as we build some of these platforms and these algorithms and these whatever is coming in the future. Not to allow ourselves to be stuck in bubbles of art where we never see things that challenge us or force us into empathy, that we maybe didn't expect or desire, because this personalized living experience creates biases that are way more deeply ingrained than they do when you're forced to experience things outside of your own perspective. So hopefully that's a thing that we can control. All right. Kevin, any final thoughts from you?
No, not really. I think I'm listening as much as anything. And I do think that I will say this one thing, which is that if these things are things that you feel passionate about, well, then that should just go into your art. Unless you have an art director that's saying, well, what we really want is everyone to love the police or something, but then that's a different story. But if you're making art that really is coming out of your own, thing, then if you feel strongly about it, then you should make your art about it. And if those, turn the tools of production on themselves.
Turn the tools against themselves. Damn the man. All right.
Well, you might like it. It's still positive or negative, your choice.
True. One final question and you can just nod yes or no to this, but I think is a really interesting thing I've seen several people say. Will the existence of the ability to use AI, is this going to make artists lazy? It's an interesting one. I don't have a lot of thoughts on that part of it. Some I think, some it might.
Define lazy.
Okay, I'll add one thing. Like people thought that what it meant when we started doing, I used to work Pixar, and when we first started doing the first movies, it became very clear that although we were able to sell the studios on the idea that we could remove departments and save them money, it actually meant that artists had more time to work on things that were less grunt work. And so the quality of the emotional character of what you could do had sometimes the potential to improve. It's also very easy to say, like, oh, how about we'll just add another 4,000 lights to something and just sort of turn it into a quantization game. But it did mean that you could spend more time on your shot, and you could spend less time worrying about getting the shapes right on all your keyframes, and more on what does this character care about and why are they thinking as they're doing it. So it can go both ways. That's not late. Is it lazy? No, it actually means you're getting closer to the heart of what was important.
I think it's going to drive some people to take shortcuts, and it's going to push others even farther than they thought they were capable of. It just depends on the person.
True artists are always going to create, no matter what tools that are out there. So I don't see the real artists getting lazy. They're just going to adapt and be able to use the tools to their advantage.
So here's a question for you that I just like put into the comments, but I was like, I wonder how this is going to affect the erotic art market, because you can't deny that there is a buttload of artists, that are pun intended, of people making a good living off of erotic artwork, and so
the whole NSFW crowd is large.
It is massive and it is weird. But if the machine learning, AI artwork programs have rules against like erotic artwork, does the erotic art community become like the last bastion of like quote unquote traditional artwork, because you can't draw, you can't like AI create, frothing.
But you can, if you want to load up your system with adult art or nudes or whatever you want to call anything that could have been forbidden. Is, of course, if you can collect enough of it, you can use that as your own training set, right? And also things that often mean things that you didn't think so. It's like, if you're familiar with Chinese politics, you might know about about how Winnie the Pooh is used and is banned on a lot of Chinese media. There are, if you go to the Vancouver Art Gallery in Vancouver, BC right now, there is an AI art show. And one of the featured artists has, he's definitely, I don't know where he gets his source material. I wouldn't say that it is directly erotic or offensive to most audiences, but it is definitely these gigantic jumbles of naked body parts that's what he's trained the system to make.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. So that's like, but Mid-Journey and like DALL-E and stuff like that, from what I understand, and I could be wrong on this, don't allow the creations of that kind of artwork.
Yeah, you can't use any, and also
because they're a commercial service, but just make your own.
Right. So, but then, then it just means someone coming along and being like, hey, got your like porn generator right here. But and that's probably coming.
Sounds like an opportunity for you, Renee.
Yeah, I'm surprised it wasn't made first. Let's be honest. I mean, that's what happened with like, first person camera stuff. That was all porn.
If Pornhub isn't already working on this, I would be surprised.
100%.
Yeah. All right, guys, we do have to close down. We have been here longer than I expected already, but this has been a super great conversation. I wish we had another 2 hours to spend, because like I said, this topic is so huge and there's so much we could cover. But first of all, I want to thank everybody who was here in the audience today, watching and sharing your thoughts. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for being here. And then to the incredible panelists, Matt and Dennis and Kate and Renee and Bekka and Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today and have this discussion. It's going to be incredible to watch the progression of this thing and see how it plays out, and what people take from this. And I just want to leave everybody with the final thought that if taking 10 years of practice to study technique all of a sudden gets taken away, then what is left is your heart and your idea. And if you can rely on somebody else to do the technique and you can give them the idea and the heart, maybe that's not such a bad thing, right? And there's a lot of places that could go. Maybe you get really, really fucking good at thinking instead of really, really good at the arm movement it takes to make a nice, clean line, right? So train your brain, guys, because at the end of the day, everything is made here before it's made here. All right, y'all. Again, thank you so much for being here. Have a fantastic evening. I'm not sure if I will be here in the morning. I'm already really fevery, but hopefully the rest of the Artist Forge will be with you here tomorrow morning, bright and early at 7 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. That's 6 a.m. for the West Coast and 9 a.m. for the East Coast, afternoon for our friends overseas. You can also go check out theartistforge.com, where there are blog posts and articles and podcasts up that you can listen to learn more about how to think like an artist. I know Bekka is working on a fantastic AI blog that hopefully will be up before too awful long. No pressure. Make sure that you go and check out these incredible artists. As soon as I have more access to my computer and I am out of quarantine, I will make sure everybody's social media links are added to the comment section in Facebook and also down to the description in the YouTube channel. So you can go follow these guys, like their stuff, share their content. They're amazing. So make sure that you go show them some love. Until then, have a great night, everybody. Go make something amazing, and we'll see y'all later.